All right, friends. Well, welcome back to the podcast. We have a new friend with us, Justin McRoberts. And Justin is an author, a former musician. If I understand right, you put out 16 records and EPs. Is that right?
Something like that, yeah.
And were you in a band, or was that all solo work?
All solo work. Just me
Okay.
and the guitar. I would conscript the help of other people, usually willingly, to help me make the records, but it was all a solo project.
Yeah. And you were like touring in the big CCM days, yeah?
Yes,
With
yes.
all of that.
Yeah, I did some of that.
Okay. I mean, I feel like maybe that ends up playing into some of the things I want to ask you about before I ask you about your book. But
Please.
You're also a church planter. Yes, is that right?
Yes, done that.
Planted a church, and now you're doing coaching as well. Like, what kind of coaching are you doing?
Predominantly, I work with artists and ministers, so places I've been.
Okay.
Like if I've done it and had enough failure and success and gained some bit of wisdom, I feel like I can have some conversations. So mostly it has to do with ministers and artists.
Okay. And is that the majority of the work that you're doing now, or like what does
Gosh,
sort of
that's a
like
great question. Maybe I don't really know. It's so like my Wednesdays are almost always like slammed from 7 till about 4:30 or 5 with coaching clients. But I'm writing, and we're going to talk about a book I just released. I'm writing another book. I run a podcast. And I'm doing some, and I'm also touring again, not with music, but with storytelling and teaching stuff around the book. So it is an amalgamation of many things. The coaching is one of them.
Yeah. Do you have like an overarching way that you think about the work that you do, that it's like you do these 12 different things, but like they all fit in this sort of umbrella or this narrative?
Yeah, I'm pastoring. I mean, it's really what I'm doing. That doesn't get fully embodied in every aspect of thing. I don't know if it gets fully embodied really anywhere, but I am pastoring in the way that I know how. How should I say it? I'm pastoring in the way that I feel like right now I'm best at doing. I want to. It's the difference between like spiritual direction. Like I'm in a spiritual direction apprenticeship.
Yeah.
And the difference between spiritual direction and pretty much everything else I do is everything else I do has pointers. Like I'm trying to move this group of people at least a little bit in this direction because I feel like this is correct. Whereas with spiritual direction, it's very helpful for me. I don't get to decide any of that. I'm just paying attention. It's also a part of pastoring. And I'm just being responsible to whatever it seems that the Spirit is up to in you. And helping you clarify that. That's an element of what I do otherwise, but like the pastoral part of it has more to do with the thing that makes it pastoral as opposed to just like spiritual direction is there are things that I do want to get across. There are directions I do want to move people as best I possibly can.
Yeah. So in the other work, it's like you have some sort of end game goal in mind that you're trying to move folks towards. And the other, like the end game is more, how do I help you pay attention to what the Spirit's doing in you and to pay attention to the voice of God in your life?
Yeah. That's a pretty good distinction. I mean, and I wouldn't even say end game goal as much as like as a coach, I'll listen to someone talk for a session or two and we'll ask some questions and then I'll get a pretty solid beat and it has more to do with like, I think you should be doing this. And I would rather you stop doing these things. And we're going to experiment and I'm going to be more prescriptive, whereas with spiritual direction, I'm not prescribing anything. I'm just like, how did that feel?
Yeah. And then how did you make the shift from like, so you're doing music stuff and you're touring and you're doing sort of that work into sort of this larger pastoring work? Like, how did that happen?
It was always there. So when I let's hop on the time machine and we'll jump back to 1998.
Okay. I'm like a freshman in college.
Okay, good for you. I was not. I was a professional. I wasn't yet, but I was on Young Life staff. And I was substitute teaching. I was tinkering around with music a little bit, like songwriting stuff. And I was also at the very beginnings of like a church plant. I'd been part of this thing as a leader in this thing for like 3 years up to that point. So I already had all these things were already happening at the same time. And so when I started, like between 90, like the end of 97 through 1999, I cut a first record, started touring. I planted a church. I got married, and I started writing towards my first like blog series type thing. So like everything sort of took off at the same time anyway.
Okay.
So it has more, my trajectory has had more to do with like emphases in different seasons and crop rotation rather than like a full blown shift.
Okay. And then I think I had caught you on some different things in different kinds of ways. Like I think I had been paying attention in some sort of way to some of the stuff that you were creating. And then I really started becoming aware of you in the books that you and Scott Erickson had created together. And those prayer books, which were fantastic. And
thank you.
And I love the idea of this, like that there's this image, that there's an image prayer and a word prayer, and that sort of like work together. And one of the things that's interesting to me, and I think that this is interesting, and even like following you on Instagram and the way that you sort of the content that you create on there, is you have a way of creating really thoughtful content that's really simple, not simplistic, but like simple. It doesn't have a lot of words to it, but there's a lot being said there. How I've got a couple of questions about that. I'm curious. One, like how did those books sort of like come about? What was the like impetus behind? I don't know that I'd seen something like that before. So what sort of like where did that like birth from?
So I'll start with the specific, and then I'll go to the sort of meta part of that narrative.
Yeah.
As a pastor in this church community in Concord, California, we took Lent relatively seriously, especially for Protestants. And we found it a really, really transformative and formative season every year. Wanted to figure out a way to pass that on because, which is like one of the things that I honestly believe about good religion is good religion provides a doorway for anybody, for the most part, who has at least to experiment. And so I felt like our Lent practice was actually good religion, that there was a doorway here, that we would fast from, we had a partnership with the Bloodwater Mission, and we would fast from every beverage but water for the entirety of Lent, collect the money that we would normally have used on booze or milk or coffee or beer or juice, and then turn that over to the Bloodwater Mission, and they would build clean water wells for folks who lack water. Fun. In the meantime, we were experimenting a little bit with like what it looked like for us to be people of prayer. And I was writing these short-ish at the time prayers for my congregation. And my congregation at the time was very, there was a lot of, it's that traditional story. There were a lot of folks who had been lots of other places. And we weren't like the alternative, like, oh, this is better, but we were more comfortable being tip of the spear, if that makes sense. Like, we don't know if this is going to work, but we're going to try.
Yeah. And were you engaged with emerging church stuff at that time, or were you totally different?
We were not engaged with emerging church stuff at the time. We were identified with emerging stuff.
Okay. Yep. Like, I had that same issue.
Yeah. Like, I don't think that's us. Is that us? I don't think that's us. Do you think that's us? Okay. So I started then taking these prayers and putting them on Twitter and Facebook, which then like I watched these short prayers for like 4 years land in places that like I really hoped they would go. And like you've done enough work to know, like you have those times in the seasons in work in which like you'll do a thing and you'll hope it works a certain way. It works 20 to 40% the way you hoped it would. And then there's all this wonderful joy of like, I didn't see that coming. That's so awesome that it turned out that way. This was fundamentally different as like a work expression in my life because it literally did exactly what I hoped it would do, which I had never really experienced. It wasn't like nailed it. It was like, holy, I like people who did not have like a comfortable relationship with religion, with God, like those were the folks who were responding, were retweeting, who were liking, who were messaging me with like, things like, is it okay if I don't call this a prayer? Because like I like it, I want this, but I don't want to call it a prayer because I don't want to be that person. Like that populace of folks resonated with it. So like I said, I kept that going over the course of 4 years, and then because it felt road tested as that expression, I wanted to do something that had more gravitas. And as much as I really do like the internet, and I like Facebook, I love Instagram, actually still kind of like Twitter. They're just I personally, and most of the folks I know, just don't take as seriously the things I read online as I do something that's printed in a book. And I don't know all of why that is. I know that there's some psychosomatic stuff in there that has to do with like actually feeling something. Some of it's a curation process. Maybe there's some sort of spiritual aspect to it that I don't see. All I know is it's true, that if it's online versus it's in a book, it's the exact same thing. It just has more heft. And because this seemed to be working, I wanted to do something that gave it weight culturally. But I also knew that like 40 of these snippet prayers probably wouldn't get a publisher and probably wouldn't get a whole lot of attention or whatever. So I'd been paying attention to Scott. I'd known him a little bit before that, but I'd been paying attention to what he was starting to do with imagery at the time. And like that, what he was doing with imagery was what I was trying to do with poetry and words, which was, I'm not trying to answer questions for you. I'm not trying to show you how to pray. I'm trying to give you a handle that lets you get into how you actually pray. I'm trying to give you permission to, if you want to borrow my words for a minute, fine. But because they're new, they're fresh, and they're really short, it leaves all kinds of freaking room for you to move on from there or to do something like it. I wanted to prompt prayer in people rather than just like, here's a prayer. And his imagery at the time was starting to do that. So we sat and had a really brief conversation. I literally said, here, I've picked 20 images that I would like. Will you give these images to me? And then would you be interested in making 20 more? And he agreed to that. And that became the first book. And then that thing did what the first experiment did on Twitter and Facebook, which was it did we self-published it, but it did in the culture around us pretty much exactly what we hoped it would do, which is why we made a second one. But that's how the thing got started, which takes me to the meta narrative part, which was the impetus. I love people and I love God, like I really do. And when I make mistakes dominantly, I make mistakes in the effort of love and care. But because of the way I love and care, I end up being a little bit controlling. As a pastor, as a leader, as a writer, like I was talking about the difference between like coaching and spiritual direction.
Yeah.
I want you to come to certain conclusions. I had to come to grips with that as a leader. Like, no, there are really certain things that I want my people or people to pay attention to me. I want you to come to this. I want this to look a certain way. I have certain metrics by which I measure growth and health.
Yep.
Right. And that's not a bad thing, but it is slightly controlling, and it is a limitation on my leadership. What the prayer books did, which is a thing I will continue to do for the rest of my life, is actually trust the divine work at hand in the place I am moving to work. So in other words, if I'm showing up to be somewhere, like I'm headed to Florida this weekend, I hope to put together the best of what I've got this weekend. I'm going to bring, I'm working on the piece right now. I hope it's great. I hope it's the best that I've got with regards to this performance piece I'm doing on Saturday night and the sermon I'm doing on Sunday. I hope I bring the best. But that actually doesn't mean anything if there isn't like an ongoing, present, extant work of God in and among those people that I am offering this as a tool to begin with, which then that needs to become the actual heart of my work. Do I really believe God's up to something? Do I really actually buy that?
Yeah.
And how do I make work that actually honors that faith in me, that I'm going to put this out here and that I'm going to literally trust the process of God in your life from this point on? Those books unlock that as an expression and unlock the sort of the impetus and the desire for me to live that way as a worker. Yeah,
it was like you could set a trajectory and you had to trust the rest of the trajectory to be outside of your control.
Yeah.
I was thinking as you're sharing, like a part of my story of walking out of the ministry position I was in at the church that I was at was just this increasing amount of anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things, or several things that had contributed to it, but one of the things was this sort of sense of like, I'm trying to take people to this place and they won't go there. And I've been doing a lot of work with different pastors around the country, and a lot of them have a lot of anxiety around a lot of that same sort of thing of like, you want to trust the work of the Spirit, you want to trust the divine to do something there, but you also like feel this need to have certain kinds of outcomes, feel a need to have people end up at a certain place. And when they are not going there, you feel like a failure. You feel like you're not cut out for the work that you're doing. You feel like I put so much effort into this sermon, this program, this whatever.
Or I mean, the other side of it, and this is part of why I try to marry these two things, there's a control element to it. There's also like a limited capacity to love well element. Like in other words, like sometimes it's like I have these metrics and I need to hit them so that I feel good about my ministry.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's literally like, I think this is what's best for you, and it scares me to death that you're not going to get there because I love you. It's like this is such a terrible example. It's like being a parent, and I hate saying this because I'm a white male and everyone's like, stop trying to parent America. I'm like, I am. I swear to God, I am. But at the same time, like one of the best pieces of early advice that I've heard about parenting is like, you spend the first 2 to 3 years in almost complete control. And then you spend the next like 18 plus years trying to let go.
Huh.
And like I have an 11-year-old and I have a 4-year-old, and I continue to find that. I can't keep you safe from everything. I have certain things and I want them for you because like I want Caitlin to have these particular things and have these particular fruits. I want Ace's life to look a particular way. And I don't do that because I'm a controlling jerk. I do like I have that in me because it's like I love you and I want good things for you, and I think this is what they are. My job, though, part of my job at least, is to be like, let's see, and I will champion the actual good work in you.
Yeah.
So sometimes it really is pure control, and there's the Mark Driscoll element of things. It's like you have a very specific metric and you're not willing to let go of it. Sometimes it's like you don't know elsewise how to love these people, and that's why you do it that way. Either way, pastors are stressed the hell out because that's been the way we've gone about things.
Yeah. Well, a piece of that sounds like codependency too, right? That it's like
Can be
a part of my feeling of well-being is caught up in your feeling of well-being. And if you are not in a good place, then I'm not going to be in a good place.
Yeah. So part of that, like, not that there are two sides to everything, but like that's codependency to a certain degree, but also that is also suffering with. I mean, it's also the other way to talk about that is compassion, right? Compassion and connectedness. I should suffer if you suffer. And that should give me a vested interest in your health. Yeah. The expression of that is probably the difference between codependency and love. In love, I hope for and work for the best, and this is really where the rubber meets the road. And my primary posture towards you is listening. In codependency, I still hope and want to work for the best in you, but my primary posture towards you is effort.
That's good. I like that, effort versus listening. That's see, you're good at the succinct, like bring it down to this thing. So I've noticed that on your every Monday, or just about every Monday, you do a thing on Instagram, a little Ask Me Anything. And I always appreciate the way that you respond to people's questions. And one of the things that I feel like I see get brought up a lot, you get asked about a lot, has to do with like deconstruction.
Yes. Which
feels like it has become faddish almost in the past year-ish. And I got so many like thoughts around it. And one of the things I want to ask you about, because I think you were the person who I first saw bring this up. I feel like one time, it was probably several months ago, you said something to the effect of like, if you aren't interacting with Derrida, you're not actually deconstructing.
I said something along those lines. Dr. Robin, of whom I'm a fan, recently said something really similar that had more to do with like the use of the word. That like I think what I said pretty specifically was, unless you're familiar with like the historical philosophical root of the word deconstruction, I'd be a little bit more careful just assigning the word deconstruction to whatever it is you're going through, if there's a difference between who you were when you were 15 and who you were when you're 27 or 40. So
Yes.
like it's not necessary. It wasn't necessarily like, if you don't know Derrida, shut up because you're stupid. It was definitely more like, because I care, literally because I care. I want folks to, I would really like the people that I know around me. It's been really key for those folks to understand the difference between, like, are you actually in a process of deconstruction, or are you just are you comfortably and happily, for the most part, rethinking some things in your life? Because those are very different processes.
Yes. Yeah.
And language shapes culture. So,
and I make you sound like much more of an ass than you actually sounded like on there. And I think
I usually am the one that makes me sound like an ass. So welcome to the team.
Well, I think anybody listening will figure out that you sound much more kind and generous than if they spent any time with me. But so, like, one of the things that I've been processing a bit, and it sounds like you might be like thinking in this similar kind of direction, is using language of deconstruction is so, like, it's very destructive and big language. And when we use that to talk about something that should be a normal process of growth, or a normal process of, like, your faith expanding, your worldview changing because you have new and different information, or because you're not 15 anymore and so you understand things differently.
Yep.
And I wonder if, even, like, I've tried to figure out, like, are people doing more damage to themselves, creating more trauma by using language that's more traumatic than what the experience actually is? And then I've also wondered, does the church hold some responsibility for that, in not creating a normalization of that process? And therefore, the only normalization of it is this big destructive word.
Yes. I think we'll start with the first part, the last part first, is part of why there's a significant pendulum effect here, right? So it's a little cliche to say this now, but it's also not untrue that an overwhelming majority of Western white male-led religious culture did not value questioning or questions that did not have pre-existing answers. So it's not like they were like, you can't question anything. No, you absolutely can. You can question anything and everything for which we have an existing answer, was actually the thing. So if it was a question that either did not have a consistent answer, or a question that had a wildly conflicting spectrum of answers, then that was disallowed. And because that was disallowed, because there was such a like an iron grip around that form of questioning, part of what happens over the course of time, and this is just mass psychology, is that tension, then when it explodes, it goes all the way the hell over there. Like, it's not like, oh my gosh, I'm free from this. Now I can actually get into some of these questions. It goes from here culturally to all the way over the wall. We're like, okay, I doubt absolutely everything. The center does not hold. Like, the blame, there is a considerable amount of blame to be placed on white, male, straight leadership over the course of the last 35 years, that, like, you're pissed that all these kids are questioning things. You should have created space for answers that you didn't have answers, for questions you didn't have answers to. That's the first part. The second part is, like, I'm actually okay with the faddish part of it, because, sort of like justice work, like, things do this. Like, I'm one of those cats who, I don't have an issue. This will sound terrible. I don't have an issue with, like, the cutesy teenage girls who are taking pictures at Disneyland after they went and built houses in Mexico. And part of why that is because they're celebrating this thing. They're like, they got the pictures with them and the kid. And I get it. It's demeaning. I understand that. But part of why they're doing that is because they want to be the kind of person who goes to Mexico and builds houses. And they want their friends to know that that's the kind of person they are, which I would suggest is a really good seed in them. There's something in them that wants to be known as a justice worker. So there is something to be said for fads in general, like for, like, pop religious crap is like, I get it. And I'm enough of an elitist that, like, I really am actually enough of an elitist where I'm like, that's trash. And it's trash, kinda, but I can show you how trash it is. But like the older I get and the more I actually fall in love with humans, the more I'm like, I showed up at Young Life Club for the very first time because there was a girl I liked. And then I went back because I could win $200 if I crushed a gallon of milk. And now I'm 48 years old and I'm still following Jesus and trying to teach other people. I planted churches and make records. Like you come through some crappy doorways to some really, really beautiful places. So the fad part of it is like, yeah, it's wildly problematic. But what if, watch me now, what if the problem isn't that people are coming through crappy doorways? What if the problem is that once they come through those crappy doorways, there aren't enough considerate, loving, invested leaders to catch people in their ill-motivated moments and then lead them to better places? What if that's actually the issue? And which is to say, what if the problem with progressive religion is that we are so concerned about our own purity, just like our forefathers were,
Yep.
that we will disallow the progress that would make us actually progressive.
That's good. The Jonathan Merritt uses the phrase, and he used it with me on the podcast a while ago, that he says, I didn't move from conservative to progressive. I moved from closed to open. And it's a very different kind of posture, a very different kind of experience, because we have a lot of people who are moving from a conservative fundamentalist to a progressive fundamentalist, from a conservative purity to a progressive purity.
Yes.
And it's the same thing, different side of the coin, but same thing.
Which is why I get hung up on the use of the word deconstruction as a blanket term for rethinking of any kind. Yeah. Because what actual deconstruction does, and what Derrida was an utter genius of, is that it actually begins with like actual deconstruction. I shouldn't say actual, Derridadian deconstruction. My preferred deconstruction. That's
which is who popularized the term.
Yes.
Right.
So Derridadian deconstruction begins with like an inherent, actually look up the phrase real quick. It was like, begins with like, I recognize in myself that like I have a desire for there to be a center. Like I have a desire for there to be a fundamental to all things. Like I recognize that as a desire in me, which is to say that I'm so sorry. This is why I told you I'm an elitist. I really actually am. That like Derridadian deconstruction begins with confession. It does not begin with critique. Derridadian deconstruction begins with a confession that I desire for there to be a center to which I can anchor myself if I have the correct language. That's the first confession. The second phase of it has to do with like the reduction of that meaning, like the whole of that meaning, like the existential meaning, to a particular set of words into language, which is to say, the first step is I recognize that I want there to be like a fundamental meaning to the world, to life, to humanity, to God, all of it. I want that. I recognize that as a desire in me. That's my confession. The second stage has to do with like, I recognize that I have I have limited what this thing is by language, that I can only identify it by words. And I know that that's actually a problem, that if it is as fundamental as I want it to be, that I am missing by defining it with certain terms, certain terminologies, which is again, a confession. That's not a critique of someone else's language. I recognize that I want to control that. I want to have it. I want it. And I want to control it by way of language. And then it goes to, which is the last phase, it actually goes to like how like that reduction, the way I say it is like how that reduction of meaning to language captures opposition. So in other words, I recognize not that someone else is wrong, but only that we are in conflict, which is so much better. So I confess that I want there to be meaning, and that's a desire in me. I confess that I limit that meaning by my own language, and that I recognize that because I define that meaning by my own language, I am in conflict with other people. That's Derridadian deconstruction, which I think invites conversation. I think it invites humility. I think it invites actual process, as opposed to like, these dipshits got it wrong. I get it now. We have to burn that thing down and build something new. No, bro, that's not deconstruction. You're just a prick. That's different.
I do like that we just brought that out of you.
Thank you.
Like you were so I was writing down in my notes as you were talking earlier that you're really good at saying like, what's the good there? What's the redemptive piece of this? And then you went there, which makes me feel better about myself.
Amen. Amen.
All right. So like, let's talk about your book, because we spent a lot of time not talking about
That's
your
fine.
book so far. You have this new book. It is what you make of it. And like, so you talk a bit about like a shift of thinking, like where does all of this sort of come from? It is what you make of it. What's the genesis of this book?
I would like to shift the responsibility for what comes next in culture to the people who have the keenest critiques. That's great. Love it. You're whatever it is that you came from culturally, institutionally, you're probably right about all the ways it misses. So what are you going to do now?
Yeah.
That is the heart of the book. That's great. You're probably right. And even if you're not right, at least you're motivated. So what do you want to do? That's it. That's my whole thing. I don't think there's not a next model. There isn't another, like, we're done with models. We're done with like sweeping generalizations of what it means to disciple. We're all done. Like, no one wants another one. Literally, look around. Like, no one wants another one. People who've been pastoring for 45, 50 years don't want another model. What they want, if they're loving people, is they want the folks they've been investing in to pass on as best they can what they've got in their hearts and souls. That's it.
Huh. Yeah. So you're like calling us to be creators rather than critiquers, or to create out of our critique.
Yeah, to co-create. That if we're really in league with the divine, then like pick up your mat and walk. Let's go.
Yeah. So you talk about like what it means to be a creative. How do you define that? How do you talk about that?
The willingness to pick up whatever pieces I have around me and do something with them. Period.
Huh. So like, what does that look like for you? I'm curious. Like you said, you spend Wednesdays doing your coaching, and then other days you're doing like other work. What do your rhythms look like that create the space and capacity for you to create, to have those ideas, to experiment with things? Like, how do you have the capacity for that?
Like actual processes?
Yeah.
So I capture a lot. Again, we'll go back to
Okay.
Gary Vaynerchuk, who's like one of my spirit animals. Seth Godin, Gary Vaynerchuk. And Gary's take on creative work, which is a lot like Seth's, has more to do with capturing things rather than just like starting from scratch all the time. So I, like, even right now, like, I have the Notes app open on my phone right here, and it which I have twice now. Like, I'll capture a quick little moment, something that like caught my brain, and I grab it, because I'll say it in two ways. I'm processing and I'm trying to pay attention all the time. Also, I'm in communion with the divine every moment of every day, and I don't get to decide when I hear from God. And so capturing that stuff, even in a quick moment with a quick word, I grab it. That's the first part of the process. Second part of the process, very, very like hyper specific, is I wake up at between 4:15 and 4:30 a.m. and I am in this space, this is my garage if I'm home. In this space, and I will spend some time doing a little bit of exercise just to get my body awake, because even my thoughts live in my body. And then there's a chair over there. I'll sit down in the chair and I will get to work on the thing, either that like I have to turn in time because I've made commitments to other people, or the thing that is most moving me in the moment. And I'll spend 60 to 90 minutes doing that. And that's every day. That's the general pattern. I'm capturing thoughts as I move along in Notes or in Evernote or in Ulysses, and then I'm making space and time for that regularly every single day. That's the everyday pattern.
Yeah.
The broad pattern is twice or three times a year I will vacate into like a 3 to 5 day retreat, and the entirety of that time is to finish things that I've been starting in the mornings.
Okay. And is that like a solo retreat? You go on your own somewhere?
Yep. Totally by myself.
That's fascinating. Like, it's such a simple process. I mean, I find there's a lot of us that have a lot of thoughts for things, a lot of ideas, a lot of starts of things, a lot of like, I'm really good at starting something. I'm not good at finishing something. And sometimes like it comes down to like those tactile, tangible, like rhythms and habits that like help me to carry it on. Right.
Yeah.
And it's really easy for me to, even like within systems that I have been a part of to want to see something. So I have like a desire for something. And there's the old, I've been going back a lot to Dallas Willard's VIM lately, Vision, Intention, Means.
Oh, I don't know
You
that.
have this, okay, so his thing on spiritual formation was VIM, that it was, you have a vision for a kingdom kind of life, what it means to be fully, truly human. You have an intention to move in that, like you have to want that and desire that.
Yes.
But then you have to have the means, and the means are the disciplines. It's the things that, and he would say a discipline is anything that you can do by direct effort that opens you up for God's Spirit to do in you what you can't do on your own by direct effort.
So good, man.
So you have like those three. So like there's a lot of like intention that's missing the means of creation, of like of creating new things, of creating new and just like simple processes like that, I think for me are super, super helpful.
Yeah. Which is the question, which is on this end, it's a cultural, that's a cultural dilemma and a leadership dilemma, because the reasons in my experience that I haven't, or the people around me haven't made room for that, is because, and it always, almost if not always, requires this. It takes someone else saying that's a good thing in you, make room for it. The culture that I have belonged to as a Protestant person doesn't say that regularly. It says this is the good thing, and when you're done doing your necessary things, we need you to come over here and help us get the good thing done.
Yeah.
Right. So the leadership and cultural question with regards to creativity, which is why I wrote the damn book, is to say the thing that's happening in you actually is the important thing. And if there's anything at all, and I mean this to the absolute depths of my being, if there's anything at all good about the work being done at the $4 million building that Hillsong built in San Francisco, if there's any good at all about that, it's that it unlocks the actual good happening in your life and the 800 square foot apartment you live in. That's the only good there is. Because if it doesn't do that, then you should burn that to the ground. And there's nothing interesting about it. But if it unlocks like the work of the divine in you, then it's worth the amount of money, the time, and the energy they spend to build their culture, to build their building. Great. You could spend as much as you want to spend. I don't care. You can have as many people as you want to have on your Sunday mornings. I really don't care. So long as you're unlocking what's actually going on in the lives of the souls, the bodies, the households of the people who show up. But if you make their dreams subservient to your one specific dream, you are a problem and you should end.
Do you think that there are models, like talking about church stuff now, do you think that there are models of church that contribute to the latter of what you're saying, the like building my thing, my hopes, my dreams, my empire? Are there ways of church that tend to lean towards that, or is it more about a personal character of the leader?
I don't really know. I think, and you would probably have more insight here than I do. Like, I'm not always so sure I know the difference between like the ethos of the model itself versus the ethos of the person who constructed it or built it. Like,
fair enough.
Isn't it always like somebody's, right? So there's 3DM. That's really Mike Breen.
Yep.
You know what I mean? There's Acts 28, but that's really like a room full of like white men in their 50s and 60s, like, or Acts 28, 29, whatever. Acts 29. That's how good I am at this stuff. I was a subscriber. But like, I don't know always the difference like between like the cult or the personality that is its heart.
Okay. All right. So back to some of the stuff in the book in like creating, your original plan doesn't always work. You have to move on from it. And you talk about like dealing with shame. Do you mind just talking a little bit about like the shame, the experience of shame of like the thing that you wanted to do doesn't work. It doesn't happen. It whatever fails.
I'll do it by doing I'll do like a truncated bit of one of the chapters. My son who's 11 now, when he was like 4 or 5, we bought a Lego kit. And the Lego kit was the Desert Rally Racer, the Lego Desert Rally Racer. And we got building, and we came to a moment in which like we couldn't find, like, we didn't have the next brick, which then led to us like doing like some scanning around pockets, the whole thing. And like we were missing 2 bricks from this Lego kit, because every once in a while Lego will send out one of these kits and it won't have all of the bricks necessary in order to build the thing. So what we didn't know at the time, and this is like a bad dad moment, because I didn't know. I didn't know in the time that like you could log on to lego.com and like describe the kit and the Lego and they would just send it to you. I didn't know that. So what happened instead is my son, who I'm almost sure is an Enneagram 4, he just got sad, and he got up and he went to the kitchen and he poured a glass of water and he went and sat in the windowsill, literally sat in the windowsill and like drank water and stared out the window into the rain.
That's so sad.
It's so sad. A 4-year-old boy. Which, and this is the thing I say in the book, which is very key, is he was doing a pretty wise thing for a kid, which is like you give sadness its moment. Because if you don't give sadness its moment, it'll steal it from somewhere else that you don't want it to take it from. Yeah. So he gives sadness his moment, and I'm watching this happen, and I'm ready to move on, right? I'm ready to like, let's fix this thing. But I take some deep breaths, because like it's really about my son. Like, I don't care that much about the thing. I don't need another Lego thing. Like, this is about building, right? I mean, talk about a leadership moment. I get so caught up in finishing the project, I forget about the people I'm making it with. So I give him space to get sad. I join him. I grab a glass of water. We sit in the window. We get, and then I start rummaging around in this like old bag of Legos that I have, of like my Legos, which like they're not kit oriented. And so as I start pulling out Legos the same color, same shape, same size, like I start tinkering around. My son's like, "What are you doing?" And I said, I'm going to finish this thing. And so he dives in. We build a little bit, and then it's ridiculous. And so we dismantle, and then we build, and then we're laughing because it looks like a duck or whatever. And then we dismantle, and then we build them. And then like we're connecting the entire time. And by the time we get to the end of the thing, it's pretty much nothing at all like the Desert Rally Racer. It's what I call in the book is it's the McRoberts truckish spaceship thing. It's just this thing. And instead of it being perfect, because that's how you end a story like that, we're like, it was perfect, but it was better than perfect because it looked like us, which I actually think is the divine story in the course of humanity. Is like, there was a time when there were specific instructions about building like an ark or like a temple, but those moments are rare. And even those things were like I would suggest like kind of a different angle on it. But God has never shied away from the human element in the process of religion and development and progress on the face of the planet. I think the heart of God is far more interested in you and I building things that look like we're in it together than getting to a place where we freaking nail the thing according to the instructions. So disillusionment, disappointment, all those things are fine. But on the other side of them, ultimately are questions about like, okay, this did not work the way it was supposed to, which, by the way, if you've been in leadership in any shape or form for more than 10 minutes, you know that that's going to be true about literally every single plan you make. Nothing you ever plan or build will look, work, or last anywhere near what you think it will. Literally, that's true of everything. And so the question always ends up becoming, what will you do then on the other side of your disappointments, and what will you build? Which then ultimately becomes a question of like, do you trust in the long-term process? Do you trust in the people you're with? And are you having a good time? In this thing with my son, like we had a great time. He has all these Legos, like Lego pieces. Like right now, like we were just at Disneyland. And so he got the Millennium Falcon, which I was like, yep. Can we please? And no, he said, I will do it. So he did it. But he's got the Millennium Falcon, and that's great. And that's like 2 weeks old. The only other thing he has up there that has lasted is the McRoberts truckish spaceship thing. And the reason it means something to him is because he felt like he sees himself in it, which I really actually believe is the heart of the divine in and through culture, creativity, leadership, church, otherwise. It's like, can you see yourself in it? And if you can't, then move somewhere else where you can, or help build something, because I don't care about the thing. I care about you. And if you're going to build the thing, I want it to look like it's got your fingerprints all over it, because you're the thing I'm building in the world. Disillusionment in our establishments, in our works, in our institutions is a gift, because it brings us back to the fundamental thing, which is us. You're the thing that God's trying to do in the world. And the fact that you're disappointed in that thing over there really might be the doorway through which you enter into like, oh, I'm the thing that God's building.
Yeah. Oh, Justin, that's so good. That's so good. All right. So the book is It Is What You Make of It.
Yes, sir.
And where can folks find you who aren't following you?
So just my name, Justin McRoberts, and that works kind of anywhere. So it works on
Great.
Google and Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. I'm all those places.
Love it. Love it. I'm so glad we got a chance to connect.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for hanging out.
My pleasure.